That winter was one of the worst for me. I'd like to say it was because of the snowstorms, the biting cold, or how the roads were clogged with slush and ice, but honestly, the storm inside my marriage made everything else seem like a mild inconvenience. My name's Jim, by the way, and if you're reading this, maybe you're trying to make sense of your own chaos, or maybe you just want to see how a man falls apart. Either way, this is my story. Linda, my wife, beautiful, smart, charming, was everything I'd ever dreamed of. When we first met, she had this glow about her, the kind that made men turn their heads and women clutch their partners a little tighter. She worked as a marketing manager for a big pharmaceutical company and had a knack for making people believe in anything she pitched. She could sell you sunshine in the middle of a rainstorm, and I was no exception. I work in real estate. Not as flashy as Linda's job, but it's been steady, and I'd made a decent living out of it. We bought a house in the suburbs, settled in, and for a while, life was good. Our relationship felt solid, and I thought I had everything I needed. But over time, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. Linda became more distant, her laughter a little more forced, her kisses less frequent. I'd come home from work, and she'd be lost in her phone or too tired to talk. Our conversations started sounding like business meetings discussing schedules, bills, and who was picking up the dry cleaning. It wasn't like before when we'd stay up late, talking about everything and nothing. I tried to ignore it, chalked it up to stress from work. She had big projects coming up, deadlines that kept her at the office late. And then there were her networking events. At first, I didn't mind. I mean, we both worked hard, and if smoozing with clients was part of her job, who was I to say anything? But then these events became more frequent. One night, early December, we had planned a romantic evening. It wasn't anything grand, just a quiet dinner at a nice little Italian restaurant we used to go to when we first started dating. But the snow came down hard that day. A blizzard, they called it, dumping foot after foot of snow until the whole city was at a standstill. Roads were closed, everything was cancelled. We stayed in, ate frozen pizza, and watched reruns of some old sitcom. It should have been cozy, a chance to reconnect. But Linda seemed distracted. She spent most of the night texting on her phone, smiling at whatever messages came through. When I asked who it was, she just said it was work stuff. Maybe that should have been a red flag, but I trusted her. Or at least I wanted to. I kept telling myself that everything was fine, that we were just going through a rough patch. It happens in every marriage, right? Things took a turn a couple of weeks later. We were at a party with some friends, a small get-together. Nothing wild. It was at this swanky rooftop bar. The kind with overpriced drinks and dim lighting that makes everyone look a little more glamorous. I wasn't really in the mood, but Linda insisted we go. She said it would be fun, that we needed to get out of the house. Everything seemed normal at first. We mingled, had a few drinks, made small talk with people we barely knew, and then Dante Romano walked in. If you don't know who Dante is, let me fill you in. He's a big deal in this town, ex-football player, local celebrity, the kind of guy who walks into a room and instantly becomes the center of attention. Women swoon over him, men want to be him, you get the picture. And apparently, Linda was no exception. I noticed her watching him from the moment he arrived. She wasn't exactly subtle about it either, her eyes following him across the room as he made his rounds, shaking hands and flashing that signature grin of his. I tried to brush it off. It was just a harmless crush, right? I mean, who wouldn't be drawn to someone like that? But something about the way she was looking at him ignored at me. Then came the dance. The DJ had switched to something slower, sultry. Couples were heading to the dance floor, and before I could even react, Dante walked over to us. He greeted Linda like they were old friends, which was strange because as far as I knew, they'd never met. And before I could even get a word in, he extended his hand and asked her to dance. Linda didn't hesitate. She took his hand and followed him onto the dance floor, leaving me standing there like an idiot. I tried to play it cool, grabbed another drink, and told myself it was just a dance. But the way they moved together, God, it was like I wasn't even in the room. They swayed, pressed close, his hand on her lower back, her lips dangerously close to his ear as she whispered something I couldn't hear. I could feel the blood boiling in my veins, but I didn't want to make a scene. Not there, not in front of all our friends. So I waited. I waited for the song to end, for her to come back to me, for her to snap out of whatever spell he had her under. But when the song ended, they didn't come back to the table. They left, together. She didn't even look back at me. The rest of the night was a blur. I remember stumbling out of the bar, trying to process what had just happened. I called her, texted her, but there was no response. Hours passed, and still, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I stayed up, pacing the living room like some caged animal, waiting for Linda to come home. Every passing minute felt like a slow death. My mind raced with questions. Where had she gone? Why hadn't she answered my calls? What the hell was she doing with Dante Romano? At some point, I lost track of time. I must have dozed off on the couch because the next thing I remember was waking up to the soft click of the front door. I shot up, heart pounding. Linda walked in like nothing was wrong. She didn't seem drunk, didn't look disheveled, just calm, collected, and annoyingly composed. "Hey," she said, her voice casual, like it was any other night. She kicked off her heels and hung up her coat. That was when I noticed her outfit, a sleek black dress that hugged her figure in all the right ways. She hadn't been wearing that when we left the house. "Where the hell were you?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't help it. My emotions were already at a breaking point. Linda frowned, tilting her head as if I had just asked something absurd. "I told you, Jim, I went out with Dante and some friends after the party. We went to this late-night diner, had a few drinks, and just hung out. Nothing to get worked up about." Nothing to get worked up about. My fists clenched at my sides. "You didn't answer my calls. You didn't respond to any of my texts. You disappeared with him and didn't even tell me where you were going." She sighed, running a hand through her hair like she was the one who had been inconvenienced. "My phone died. I didn't think it was a big deal. I'm sorry if you were worried, but it's not like I was doing anything wrong. We were just talking." Just talking. The way she said it, so dismissive, so cold, it made me want to scream, but I swallowed the anger, tried to keep my voice steady. "Talking? You left with him, Linda. You left me there at the bar. You were dancing with him." Like I trailed off, not even sure how to finish the sentence. "Like what? Like lovers? Like something more than just friends?" Linda rolled her eyes. "Jesus, Jim, it was a dance. You're overreacting." "Am I?" I stepped closer, trying to search her face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of remorse. But there was nothing. She wasn't sorry. Not really. "You spent the night with him, Linda?" Her eyes flashed, just for a second, and I caught it something darker, something hidden. But she covered it up quickly, masking it with a tired sigh. "I didn't spend the night with him. We went out, had some fun. And that's it. I'm allowed to have friends, you know." "Friends?" "Yeah, right." I wanted to push more, to demand the truth, but something in her tone told me it wasn't worth it. Not then, at least. So I let it go for now. The days that followed were a mess of tension and unspoken accusations. Linda continued to act like nothing had happened, going about her routine as if our marriage wasn't crumbling beneath our feet. She'd head off to work, come home late, and spend more time glued to her phone than talking to me. It felt like I was living with a stranger. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved for years, was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I started noticing more and more things that didn't add up. There were nights when Linda would come home smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. I'd ask her about it, and she'd brush me off with some excuse about it being from a co-worker or a sample she'd tried during lunch. She spent more time getting ready in the mornings. 2, putting extra effort into her appearance, even on days when she wasn't going into the office. When I asked if something was going on, she'd laugh it off, telling me I was just being paranoid. But the real kicker came when I found out she had reconnected with Dante. It was by accident, really. One night, Linda left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and as I walked by, I noticed his name pop up in her messages. There it was, Dante Romano, bold and clear. My stomach dropped. I knew I shouldn't look, but my hands moved on their own, clicking through the messages. It wasn't just casual conversation. They were talking about meeting up again. He was asking her when she'd be free, and she was responding, telling him she'd figure something out soon. My chest tightened, the words on the screen blurring as my heart pounded in my ears. I confronted her that night. "Are you still talking to him?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, but full of the weight of what I already knew. Linda didn't even flinch. She shrugged, like it was no big deal. "Yeah, so? We're friends, Jim, that's all?" I held her gaze, trying to keep my composure, but the knot in my stomach was twisting tighter. "He's not just a friend. Linda, don't lie to me." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't trust me, do you? You're making this into something it's not." My head was spinning. Maybe I was making it into something it wasn't, but everything in me screamed that something was wrong, that she was lying to my face. I tried to find the right words, tried to get through to her, but it felt like talking to a wall. The distance between us was growing every day, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap, or if I even could. Linda started going out more after that, claiming work dinners, late-night meetings and networking events that always seemed to run long. I didn't believe a word of it, but I had no proof. And without proof, what was I supposed to do? I didn't want to be that guy, the one who accused his wife without reason. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was happening behind my back, something I couldn't ignore much longer. I was right on the edge. I just didn't know how far Linda had already gone. I remember the day it all came crashing down. It's burned into my mind like a scar that refuses to heal. I thought I had been suspicious before, but nothing prepared me for what I uncovered. Linda had left early that morning, saying she had an important business meeting downtown. Her words were crisp, rehearsed even, and that familiar knot of suspicion tightened in my gut. It had become a ritual at that point, her leaving with barely a word, and me standing there, wondering how far gone she really was. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the late nights, the evasive answers. I wasn't a fool, though I was starting to feel like one. So I made a decision that morning. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. I needed to know what the hell was going on. I followed her. Hello. Linda didn't know that I had taken the day off from work, and she definitely didn't know that I had slipped behind the wheel of my car just a few minutes after she'd left. She'd made it easy for me. not even bothering to check if I was still at home. That should have been my first clue she didn't expect me to follow. She didn't care anymore. I kept a safe distance as I tailed her through the city. She wasn't heading toward her office building, like she'd said. Instead, she drove across town, toward the nicer part of the city. My chest tightened as I followed her car, weaving through traffic, my mind racing with all the possibilities. Every block felt like a countdown, ticking closer to something I didn't want to face but knew I had to. After about 20 minutes, she pulled up to a hotel. Not one of those cheap motels where you might expect a quick affair to take place. No, this was a high-end hotel. The kind where the wealthy businessmen and celebrities stayed. The kind of place Dante Romano would be comfortable in. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. I watched as Linda got out of her car, dressed in her professional best-of-fitted skirt, blazer, heels that clicked confidently on the pavement. She glanced around briefly, her expression calm, collected, and completely devoid of guilt. Then she disappeared through the revolving doors. I should have stopped right there. I should have turned the car around and driven away. But some part of me, a sick, desperate part, needed to see it for myself. So I parked the car, my heart pounding in my ears, and followed her inside. The lobby was beautiful, marble floors gleaming under the soft lighting. The kind of place where everything screamed wealth and power. My shoes squeaked against the polished floor as I tried to act normal, like I belonged there, but my chest was tight, my mind racing with what I was about to uncover. I kept my distance as Linda walked toward the elevators, my heart sinking as she pressed the button and waited. Moments later, the elevator doors opened, and I saw him, Dante Romano. The bastard stepped out of the elevator like he owned the place, all 6'3" of him, perfectly groomed and exuding confidence. He smiled when he saw Linda, that easy, arrogant grin I'd seen so many times before on TV. And then, without a second thought, without even checking if anyone was watching, he kissed her. Right there in the middle of the damn lobby, where anyone could see. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to move. It wasn't a quick peck on the cheek or some friendly hug between old friends, no. This was a kiss that said everything I'd been dreading. It was deep, passionate, the kind of kiss that confirmed my worst fears. My world shattered in that moment. They pulled apart after what felt like an eternity, completely unaware of the fact that I was standing just a few feet away, watching the whole thing unfold. Linda laughed softly, her hand resting on Dante's chest as they talked in hushed tones. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months, maybe years, and that was what broke me. Not the kiss, not the fact that she was standing there with him, but the way she looked at him, that sparkle in her eyes, the same one she used to have when she looked at me. I couldn't stand there any longer. The bile rose in my throat as I turned on my heel and stormed out of the hotel, my mind a whirlwind of rage, disbelief, and heartbreak. I barely made it to the car before I started shaking uncontrollably, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to pull myself together. But how do you pull yourself together when your entire life has just fallen apart? I sat there in that car for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the dashboard, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My wife, the woman I had loved, trusted, built a life with, had been cheating on me. And not just any affair, no. It had to be with him, Dante Romano, the golden boy everyone worshipped. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. I needed proof. Solid proof. Something that would hold up when I confronted Linda, something she couldn't weasel her way out of. So, I waited. I waited for them to leave the hotel, waited to follow them again, hoping for more evidence of their betrayal. Hours passed before they finally emerged. Dante had his arm draped around Linda's waist as they walked out of the hotel, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, shaky, blurry images that captured enough to prove what I already knew. They got into Dante's car, a sleek black sports car that looked like it cost more than our house. I tailed them as they drove across town, heading to the outskirts, to some private, gated neighborhood where the rich and famous lived. I watched as they disappeared behind the tall iron gates, leaving me outside, alone with my thoughts and my shattered marriage. That night, Linda came home late. She didn't offer any explanation, didn't even seem to care that I had been waiting up for her. She gave me a half-hearted smile, kissed me on the cheek like it was any other night, and went straight to bed. I sat there in the dark, my fists clenched, my mind replaying every second of what I had seen. The kiss, the way they touched, the way they laughed, the betrayal. I knew I couldn't just let it slide. I needed to confront her, to make her admit what she'd done, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed more evidence, more leverage, so I waited. I waited for the right moment to strike. The betrayal was no longer a question of if, but how much. And that's when I knew. This wasn't going to end with an apology. This was war. Us. The next morning, everything felt different. The air between Linda and me was thick with unspoken words, like a bomb waiting to go off. She moved around the house as if nothing had changed, acting like the dutiful wife. It made me sick. Every smile she gave me, every touch, felt like a lie. She had no idea I knew. No idea that the image she had been trying so hard to preserve had already shattered. I spent the entire day pacing the house, thinking about how I'd confront her. Every scenario played out in my mind, her screaming, denying, throwing excuses at me until I couldn't breathe. But I wasn't going to let her gaslight me into submission. I was done with the lies, the deception. That evening, after she got back from work, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The sight of her walking through the door like nothing was wrong set my blood boiling. She was in another sleek, tight-fitting dress, her makeup flawless, hair done just right. I knew who she had been trying to impress, and it sure as hell wasn't me. "Linda," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "we need to talk." She glanced at me, barely lifting her eyes from her phone. "Can it wait, Jim? I'm exhausted. It's been a long day." "Yeah, I'm sure it has," I muttered, crossing my arms. "Busy day with Dante, ha." That got her attention. Her fingers froze over her phone, and she slowly lifted her gaze to meet mine. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. Linda, I followed you yesterday. I saw everything." Her face went pale. For the first time in months, she didn't have a response ready. No quick lies, no dismissive remarks. She just stood there, staring at me, the color draining from her cheeks as the weight of my words sunk in. "I went to the hotel," I continued, taking a step closer to her. "I saw you with him. I saw how you kissed him. I saw how you laughed and walked out of there like nothing mattered, like we didn't matter." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was frozen, like a deer caught in headlights, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to weasel her way out. "I have pictures, Linda, I have proof," I added, pulling out my phone and showing her the blurry images I'd taken of them leaving the hotel together. "So don't even try to lie your way out of this." She blinked, and then, almost like she had decided to switch tactics, her expression softened, and she dropped the phone onto the counter. "Jim, I'm sorry." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. It wasn't what I had expected. I had braced myself for a fight, for her to scream at me, deny everything, accuse me of being paranoid. But instead, she just stood there, looking defeated. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her eyes dropping to the floor. "It was just, I don't know. Things between us haven't been right for a long time, and I got swept up in it. Dante, he's just..." "Don't you dare blame this on us," I snapped, my voice rising. "I've tried, Linda. I've been here, doing everything I can to make this marriage work, while you've been sneaking around behind my back with him." She flinched, but she didn't argue. Her shoulders slumped, and she leaned back against the kitchen counter, her arms wrapping around herself like she was trying to protect herself from the weight of her own guilt. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's my fault. I messed up. I don't know what to say." "You could start with the truth," I said, my voice tight with anger. "How long has this been going on? How many times have you been with him?" Linda's lips trembled, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't want to answer. She didn't want to admit how deep this betrayal ran, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook. "Tell me the truth, Linda," I demanded. "I deserve that much." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment, I thought she might lie again, might try to downplay it. But then, she sighed, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her deceit had finally become too much to carry. "It started a few months ago," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "After that party where we met Dante, we started talking, texting, and then things just escalated." "Escalated," I repeated, my jaw clenched. "How many times?" Her silence told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just once. It wasn't some drunken mistake or one-time lapse in judgment. This had been going on for months. My hands curled into fists at my sides, the rage boiling up inside me, threatening to spill over. "So all those late nights, all those work dinners, you were with him?" Linda nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry, Jim, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt me," I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and sharp in the air between us. "You didn't think screwing around with Dante Romano would hurt me. You didn't think lying to me, sneaking around, would hurt me." I didn't think it would get this bad," she stammered, tears now streaming down her face. "I was going to stop, Jim, I swear. I was going to end it." "Well, it's over now," I said coldly, stepping away from her, putting more distance between us. "I'm done, Linda. I can't do this anymore." She sobbed then, her hands covering her face as she crumbled to the floor, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. All I could feel was the deep, burning rage that had been building inside me for weeks. She had betrayed me, over and over again, and I couldn't just forgive that. I left the room, needing space to breathe, to think, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Linda wasn't the only one to blame. Dante, that bastard, he had been part of this too. He had known she was married, and he didn't give a damn. He had seduced her, lured her away from me, and walked around like he was untouchable. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. That night, after Linda had gone to bed, I sat down at my computer and started digging. I looked up everything I could about Dante, his history, his business ventures, anything that might give me leverage. I wasn't going to let this slide. He had ruined my marriage, and I was going to make sure he paid for it. I found more than I expected. Dante was not the squeaky clean hero he pretended to be. There were rumors, whispers about shady dealings, illegal gambling, connections with people he shouldn't have been involved with. I started compiling everything I could find, determined to expose him for the fraud he was. It was time for revenge. But first, I had to make sure Linda didn't get away with it either. The divorce would be messy, and I needed every ounce of leverage I could gather. She wasn't going to walk away from this without consequences. I was preparing for war. The day I filed for divorce, the air was sharp with winter's chill. I had barely slept since the confrontation with Linda. She knew it was coming. There was no salvaging what was left of our marriage. She didn't even fight it. The papers were drawn up quickly, and the legal process began. I had thought seeing her break down that night might make me feel something other than rage, but all I felt was a cold, hollow emptiness. She had shattered everything, and there was no way to put it back together. The divorce was one thing, but my real focus was on Dante while Linda had spent the next few days trying to clean up her mess, crying in the bathroom or on the phone with God knows who. I was preparing for the real battle. I wasn't going to let Dante slip away with just ruining my marriage. He needed to face the consequences. With everything I'd found out about him, I had enough to at least make his life uncomfortable. Illegal gambling, tax evasion, and a few too many connections to unsavory characters. I'd spent every spare moment gathering evidence, organizing files, and talking to anyone I could find who might help bring him down. But what pushed me over the edge, what made it personal, beyond just the betrayal, was the car. Yeah, the damn car. It was the day after I filed for divorce. I had gone to the gym to try and clear my head, to work off some of the anger and frustration. When I came back to the parking lot, there it was, Dante's flashy black sports car, parked in front of my house. He was sitting in the driver's seat, engine idling, his window down like he was waiting for something. Or someone. For Linda. That son of a bitch was parked right in front of my house, taunting me. It felt like he was rubbing it in my face, like he was reminding me that he had taken everything. Linda had packed up some of her things by then and had been staying with a friend, so why was Dante here? To pick her up? To whisk her away to his penthouse while my life crumbled around me? Something in me snapped. I walked right up to his car, my heart pounding in my chest, my fists clenched at my sides. Dante didn't even flinch when he saw me coming. He had that smug look on his face, like he was untouchable, like I was some pathetic fool. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" I demanded, my voice low, full of the fury I had been holding back for weeks. Dante smirked, leaning back in his seat. "Just picking someone up. No need to get worked up, man." "Someone? You mean my wife?" I spat the words out like venom. His smirk widened. "Ex-wife, right? Come on, Jim, don't make this harder than it has to be." She made her choice. Something in my chest twisted, and before I knew it, I swung. My fist connected with his jaw, and the impact sent him reeling back against the driver's seat. He let out a grunt of pain, his hand flying up to his face in shock. But I wasn't done. Years of rage, heartbreak, and frustration poured out of me in that single moment. I swung again, harder this time, my knuckles slamming into his cheek. Dante cursed, scrambling to get out of the car. But I didn't give him the chance. I yanked the door open and dragged him out onto the pavement. The next few moments were a blur, fists flying, the sound of bone against bone, and Dante's curses filling the air. He got a few hits in, but I barely felt them. All I could see was red. I don't know how long it lasted, but by the time I stopped, Dante was on the ground, groaning in pain, his perfect face bruised and swollen. My hands were shaking, covered in blood, some of it mine, most of it his. I stood over him, panting, my chest heaving with the effort. "Stay the hell away from me," I growled, my voice trembling with rage. "And stay the hell away from Linda. You've taken enough from me." Dante didn't respond. He just lay there, clutching his side, his breath shallow. I turned and stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind me. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, but the satisfaction I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, I felt emptier than ever. Later that night, the cops came. Dante had pressed charges, of course. Assault, property damage. I had kicked in the side of his precious car in the middle of the fight. They didn't arrest me on the spot, but I knew I was in trouble. Still, I didn't regret a damn thing. That bastard had it coming. The legal proceedings were messy. Linda and Dante had tried to paint me as the unstable, jealous husband who couldn't handle the truth. But I had my own evidence. Pictures, recordings of conversations, everything I had gathered in the weeks since I found out about their affair. It was enough to expose their lies, enough to prove that what they had done was far worse than anything I had done to Dante's face or his car. In court, Dante sat there, his face still healing from our fight, glaring at me the entire time. Linda, on the other hand, couldn't even look at me. She sat with her head down, like she was ashamed. But it was too late for that. Shame wasn't going to fix what she had broken. When it came time for me to speak, I admitted what I had done. I wasn't going to lie. Yeah, I hit Dante. Yeah, I damaged his car. And I took full responsibility for it. I pleaded guilty to the charges, and in the end, I got off with a slap on the wrist, community service, and a small fine. But the real victory came when the court ruled in my favor. Linda and Dante had tried to cover up their affair, tried to make it seem like I was the one at fault, But the evidence I'd collected was enough to turn the tide. Dante's reputation took a hit, and Linda, well, she wasn't getting a damn thing from me in the divorce. More than that, I got custody of the kids. That was the only thing I really cared about. The house, the cars, the money, none of that mattered anymore, but the kids were mine. Linda didn't fight me on that, not after everything had come out in court. She knew she had lost, and I think a part of her was relieved that she wouldn't have to face them every day, knowing what she had done. It wasn't long after the court proceedings that I met Ellen. She was a friend of a friend, someone I hadn't even noticed before all of this mess started. She was kind, warm, and, most importantly, she wasn't Linda. We took things slow at first, but eventually we started building something together. It wasn't the same as it had been with Linda, but maybe that was a good thing. I didn't need the whirlwind romance or the perfect image, I just needed someone I could trust. Ellen became a part of my life, part of the kids' lives too. We didn't have children of our own, but we didn't need to. She filled the gaps that had been left after Linda's betrayal, and slowly I began to heal. As for Linda and Dante, well, I heard through the grapevine that their little love affair didn't last much longer after the trial. Dante's career was damaged, and Linda, she faded into the background, no longer the dazzling woman who used to turn heads. It's funny how life works out sometimes. The people you think will be there forever turn out to be the ones who tear you apart. But I survived. I came out the other side of this mess, a little bruised, a little scarred, but stronger. And now I'm free.